Falkus Kibre, also known as the Widowmaker, was a captain of the Sons of Horus Legion during the course of the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, who in time would go on to lead a Black Legion warband known as Eliphusz Blade. Kibre was known for being both an utterly uncompromising warrior and a highly capable officer upon the field of battle, often seen leading squads of Justinian Terminators, the most elite warriors of the entire Sons of Horus Legion, wherever the fighting was thickest. Indeed, it was due in part to both his martial prowess and sheer relentlessness in battle, which would see Kibre adopting the moniker of Widowmaker. Following the onset of the Horus Heresy, which would see the Sons of Horus Legion turned against the Imperium and side with their Primarch, Horus Lupercal, in his attempted coup against the Emperor, Kibre would willingly choose to follow his gene father into damnation. It was shortly after the loyalist elements of the Legion were purged during the course of the Istvan III atrocities that Kibre, at the suggestion of Horus Aximund, the captain of the Legion's 5th Company, would be inducted into the ranks of the newly re-established Morneval, a council of 4 officers who served as advisors and confidants to their Primarch. During the latter years of the heresy, following the Battle of Tisolian, Horus would be grievously wounded by Demon Russ, the Primarch of the loyalist Space Wolves Legion. Despite believing that the wound had completely healed, it would tear itself open once more following the battle for Beta Garmon, plunging Horus into a comatose state. While Aximund and Malagurst, the Primarch's equerry, engaged in a petty power struggle in the absence of First Captain Ezekiel Abaddon, who at the time was leading a force pursuing the remnants of the Space Wolf fleet, Kibre would stand vigil over his gene father, preventing anyone from entering the chamber where Horus's near-lifeless body lay. When Malagurst, with the aid of Callus Ecodon, attempted to gain access to Horus's body in an attempt to heal him of his wounds, Kibre, believing that Malagurst was attempting to slay the Primarch, would lead his Justinian into battle against the Equerries Luperci, warriors that had formed parasitic bonds with demonic entities in a similar manner to the Gal Vorbak of the Word-Bearers Legion. As Kibre came close to killing Ecodon, Malagurst would succeed in conducting a sorcerous ritual to restore Horus's body and soul, allowing the Primarch to awaken, now fully healed of his wounds. Kibre, after being seized by the throat by his gene father, would order for his warriors to stand down before quickly submitting to his Primarch's will. During the Siege of Terra, Kibre would lead one of the breacher teams that sought to undermine the defenses of the Imperial Palace by tunneling underneath the Saturnine Gate, a location which Traitor Legion forces had deemed to be a structural weak point, which had been seemingly overlooked by the Loyalists. The weak point was, in fact, a carefully baited trap laid by Rogul Dawn, the Primarch of the Imperial Fists Legion, who had deployed a number of kill teams ready to intercept and counteract the traitor assault under the assumption that Horus himself would be personally leading the traitors into the fray. During the ensuing battle, Kibre would face off against the loyalist Death Guard captain Nathaniel Garrow, but would ultimately be slain, cleaved in two and decapitated by Garrow's sword, forcing what appeared to be a demonic entity out of his ruined body and back into the warp. Following the events of the Horus Heresy, which saw the majority of Traitor Legion forces being banished into the depths of the warp space rift known as the Eye of Terror, it would be revealed that Kibre had somehow managed to survive his apparent death. Kibre and the forces under his command, who would in turn become transformed into monstrous beings known as Possessed, would be amongst the first warriors to pledge themselves to Ezekiel Abaddon, after the Spoiler had laid the foundations for an entirely new legion, one that was formed from the very ashes of the Sons of Horus itself, the Black Legion. As the Black Legion grew in size, power and influence, Kibre would in time come to serve as one of the bringers of despair, the Legion's Terminator elite, in addition to maintaining command of his own personal warband, known as Eliphusz Blade. While Falkus Kibre has grown to become a highly valued and influential member of the Black Legion, one important question remains unanswered. Just how did Kibre manage to survive his supposed death during the Siege of Terra? The first possibility is that Falkus Kibre, who now serves the Despoiler during the 41st millennium, is not the same man who perished during the Horus Heresy. This is not to say that there were two high-ranking members of the Sons of Horus Legion who shared the name of Falkus Kibre, even though such a possibility is not entirely impossible. although admittedly highly unlikely, but that the modern-day incarnation of Kibre is, for lack of a better term, a doppelganger. As detailed within the novel Saturnine, Kibre was shown to have been heavily corrupted by the powers of chaos, perhaps even unknowingly so. This corruption was so great that Kibre had not only become possessed by a demonic entity, but his internal organs had been altered to such an extent that it appeared, from a biological standpoint, that the Widowmaker had not truly been himself for an extended period of time, as detailed with the following passage.
Falkus Kibre rocked. Garrow wrenched the blade out of him and hacked, splitting Falkus Kibre through the chin, the sternum, and the groin. Torn open, Kibre sank to his knees. Glossy black organs bulged and spilled out of him, carried by a rush of fluid as dark as promethium. He had not been Falkus Kibre in any organic sense for a long time. Whatever invisible, etheric thing had been nesting in him shrieked and fled, leaving its ruined host body behind.
Seeing that Kibre was specifically referred to as being a host for some type of demonic entity, it is possible that whatever creature inhabited his body went on to possess another individual sometime after the Widowmaker's death, before altering the appearance of their new body over time so that their physical features would once again resemble those of the original Falkus Kibre. Such a notion wouldn't be entirely unprecedented, as a similar such case would occur with the demon known as Tormageddon. Tormageddon was a demon that was first summoned into the material realm by Eliphusz, the Dark Apostle of the Wordbearers Legion, following the Battle of Chaos. According to the demon itself, as detailed within the novel Slaves to Darkness, Tormageddon was formed from the very soul of the royalist son of Horus, Tarik Torgaden, who perished during the events at the Istvan III atrocities. Indeed, Malagas would also note that the demon, after being bonded to the lifeless body of Grail Noctua, not only continued to speak with Torgaden's voice, but Noctua's own physical features would be slowly erased and replaced by those of the demon itself. While unconfirmed, it's implied that the demon's physical features were, at the very least, partially based upon those of Torgaden himself. Since Tormageddon was believed to have been born from the very soul of Tarik Torgaden, or at the very least had somehow managed to merge with it, then by extension, this means that it is entirely possible for the demon that had bonded itself to Falkus Kibre to have performed a similar such action in the wake of Kibre's death at the hands of Nathaniel Garrow. This in turn would mean that, upon taking possession of a new host, the demon would have altered their new body to more closely resemble that of Kibre, essentially allowing the Widowmaker to become reborn once more. But if Kibre had indeed become the host for a demonic entity during the Siege of Terra, then this revelation would appear to contradict a series of events that occurred long after the traitor legions had fled into the Eye of Terror. During the course of the Legion Wars, as detailed within the novel Talon of Horus, Falkus Kibre's personal frigate, the Rise of the Three Suns, will be destroyed following an ambush orchestrated by the forces of the Emperor's children. As the Sons of Horus attempted to abandon ship following the rupture of its warp core, the resulting discharge of energy would begin to attract an innumerable horde of demonic entities, which then descended upon the Widowmaker's forces in a violent feeding frenzy. While roughly 20 Astartes, including that of Falkus Kibre himself, would manage to survive the ensuing slaughter and be successfully retrieved by their allies, it would eventually be discovered that Kibre and his men had become unwitting hosts for the very creatures that had sought their destruction, resulting in them becoming transformed into possessed. Despite this apparent contradiction, however, there is nothing to explicitly dismiss the possibility that this latter act of demonic possession was simply the second instance of Falkus Kibre symbiotically bonding with a warp-spawned entity, or at the very least was simply the first time that such a process was in any way noticeable. Although this would still fail to explain as to how, exactly, the Widowmaker was able to recover from being bisected in the first place. This then leads into our next possibility, in that Kibre was in fact genuinely resurrected, either due in part to a sorcerous ritual, or even by the very whims of the Chaos Gods themselves. While such a notion may seem overly simple or convenient, there have been instances of notable champions of chaos being resurrected, sometimes inexplicably, in order to fight for the ruinous powers once more. One such example is shown with the Dark Apostle Eliphusz the Inheritor, who despite being slain by a demon prince in an explosion of gore, would somehow manage to resurrect themselves from death before being recruited into the Black Legion warband of Arhpriest the Pillager. Another individual who was seemingly able to return from the dead was the Thousand-Sun sorcerer known as Maddox, who would eventually return to the world of the living sometime after his death at the hands of the space wolf Ragnar Blackmane. However, whether Maddox had in fact truly returned from the dead, or if he in fact utilized his abilities to somehow create a new corporeal form for his soul to inhabit, comprised entirely out of psychic energy in a manner similar to that performed by demonic entities whenever they manifest within the material universe, is somewhat unclear. In either case, this shows that it is not entirely outside the realm of possibility for Kibre to have simply been resurrected by his allies, quite possibly through sorcerous means, at some indeterminate point in time. Regardless as to how the Widowmaker was able to return from death, he will nonetheless continue to battle fiercely for his master, until death finally comes for him once more. But what do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.